Call this meeting to order. It is 10:02, and welcome everybody. We will start with the call to order. Do we have a roll call or?
I don't typically do it now. I do it in the open session.
Okay.
I see Director Vallejo, but they might be in on that number.
We'll move on to item number 2, AB 361 finding. Keith Lemieux, did you want to report on that, please?
I guess I better wake up. So this is the continuing item that we've had on there. This is the item that allows us to do the partially live, partially televised format that we've adopted, as well as having the committees done via video conference. So this is an adoption of the agenda and a continuation of the findings that the video conferencing is necessary and desirable.
Thank you, sir. Next, we'll move to item number 3, public comment on closed session. Oh, sorry. Okay.
Sorry, do we have a quorum of the members on this line where we can do a vote? Okay. Sorry. So we do need a motion in a second.
Yeah, I need a motion in a second.
Oh, so move.
Second.
Chairman Peters. Vice Chair Heyman.
Aye.
Director Vallejo.
Aye.
Director Ratora.
Aye.
Director Itmeyer. And the motion carries.
Oh, actually, you have Philip here now.
Okay, moving on to item number 3, public comment on closed session. Do we have any public comment on closed session from the floor? Seeing none, do we have any public comment on the phone lines? Seeing none, we will now adjourn into closed session. Call this meeting to order at 11:08, and we will begin with report on closed session.
Yeah. Board met in closed session. We've got 6 separate items identified on there. They're broken down generally into property negotiations, and then there's 5 identified litigation matters. The board heard reports on each of these items. However, there is no reportable action on any item. Mr. Vice Chair, that concludes the report.
Thank you, sir. Next, if you'll join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Vice Chair, can I say something for the benefit of the public?
Yes, sir.
You'll note that the Vice Chair is currently chairing the meeting, and that's because the current chairman, Philip Peters, is remote, and it would be difficult to chair the meeting from the remote location. So I just want to make it clear that this is just a temporary substitution.
Thanks for presenting that. Okay, next we will have our roll call.
Chairman Peters.
Here.
Vice Chair Heyman.
Present.
Director Vallejo.
Present.
Director Itmeyer.
Present.
Director Ratora.
Here.
Okay, moving on to item number 6, public comment. Do we have any, well, I'll go ahead and read it. This time is reserved for the public to address the board about matters not on the agenda. No action will be taken on non-agenda items unless authorized by law, and comments are limited to 3 minutes per person. So do we have any public comment from the floor?
My name is Mike Neal. Most of the comments I am about to make here do not apply to the member of the board, Mr. Rotora, and in part to the San Bernardino representative. The rest apply very well to the rest of you. I'm going to mention two numbers to get your interest here. 2 and 223. Give you a second to guess what that might be about. So we're all here today to talk about business of this agency that has to do with an agenda that has 223 pages to it. Now here's standard procedure, has been for forever for this groundwater agency and their staff. It went to the very last minute of the 72 hours required public notice to put out a summary agenda. And I mean, in some cases, literally minutes before the 72 hours is about to expire. On a Sunday, well, my sympathies to the poor GA staff who have to work on Sunday. Sure they do. No, I guarantee you they've got this agenda already set on Friday, but they don't want to put it out so anybody can see anything. They want to wait till the last minute. If that's not the case, well, they disavow it. Sorry, don't bother. I won't believe it because pattern displays the truth. In this case, they put it out, and then they wait till the next day to put out the full agenda. 223 pages of agenda. Obviously, the assumption is that everybody who wishes to be involved, which sadly today doesn't look like very many, they have nothing else to do but sit around for 2 days and read the 223 pages of the agenda and all the stuff in there and try to digest the facts and ruminate and think about it. To which I say, thank you very much for showing us one more time how you disrespect the public and the people that you're supposed to, at least, on the face, represent, and make it as difficult as possible for us to actually understand what's in all this documentation and be able to bring any comment forward on it. So one more time, after years, literally, of refusing to hold these meetings at a reasonable hour where more people of the public can attend, continuing to hold them in the morning, in the middle of the week, so the working public has to take off work to come down here. You continue to put out hundreds of pages 2 days before the meeting, so we'll have plenty of time to sit and think about it, right? Sure. Thank you very much, and this is why I say the public needs to quit funding this agency. I applaud Searles Valley for refusing to pay their replenishment fee, and I hope soon, someday really soon, the day will come when the water district does likewise, because they've had their fill of you.
Any other public comment from the floor? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the phones. Caller, go ahead. I think that was a false start, and I don't believe we have any further calls coming in, so if we do, we'll fall back to them. Okay, moving on to item number 7, board member comments. Any board members wish to make any comments at this time?
Vice Chair Heyman, can I jump in?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. I just wanted to extend my apologies for not being there in person today. I've been a little under the weather the last couple of days, and out of an abundance of caution, since I had the opportunity to attend remotely, I thought I'd take advantage of that. But I look forward to being out there again real soon.
Thank you, Director Peters, and we're glad to have you with us today. Any other board member comments? Okay. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 8, consent agenda. Item number 8A, approve the minutes of the board meeting January 12th, 2021. 8B, approve the expenditures. Item B1, $80,037.40 to Stetson Engineers. Item B2, $30,539.50 to Regional Government Services. And item B3, $13,906.25 to Capital Corps Group. Any member of the public wish to have an item removed? Seeing none, any member of the board wish to have an item removed? Seeing none,
To make a motion to approve consent.
we have a motion.
Second.
And we have a second.
Chairman Peters,
Aye.
Vice Chair Heyman,
Aye.
Director Vallejo,
Aye.
Director Itmeyer,
Aye.
Director Ratora.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, very good. Moving on to item number 9, board discussion and action on project priority ranking for DWR Sigma IP grant funding opportunity. This will be presented by Capital Corps and Stetson.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, I'll do a quick start on that. But first, it might be out of order, but I've done that before, and they've gotten away with it. In response to Mr. Neal's comments, I just wanted to make one comment so the public knows that's here and the public that is listening is here, is there is in no way an attempt to try and on purpose delay release of any documents for this meeting. That's just not, it doesn't make any sense. We wouldn't do that to begin with. That's not what we do. But I'll also make sure you're aware that April, who puts this package together, does work very, very hard to pull this together. We try to get it out on Friday. We try to get her all the documents that we have for her on Friday by midday so that she can get it out on Friday and not work the weekends. Packages like this were very large. This was a very large package. So as you saw, April worked over the weekend to get it out. So I express a lot of appreciation to the work that she does. And I just want people to know that that's the way it works. For us, our job is to get our documents to April by noon on Friday. There are things that are going on. We are working on things days before that, and so we cannot produce PowerPoints on what's going on and what we want to report until the very last minute to make sure they're accurate and they're up to date as possible. We had a PAC meeting that we tried to include in this package also in our PowerPoint. So a lot of work is done ahead of getting information and preparing the documents that actually go into these packets to get them to April. And then April has the task of pulling it all together and getting out. So that's just the process. And I just want to make sure there was an explanation out there of how hard the staff does work to get it out. And we've done better. In the past, we haven't gotten PowerPoints out until right before the meeting. We've gotten board packets out and been late on PowerPoints. So we've moved everything back. I remind my staff the week ahead of time, I need your PowerPoints by Thursday so we can get them to April on time. So that really wasn't part of that item, but I just want to point that out. So, sorry.
I want to thank you for addressing that. And I'd like to also add to that, as a member of the public, I do take a day off work, an entire day unpaid to be here today. So members of the public do work in harmony with this. So,
Right.
So please go ahead.
Thank you. Okay, so item 9. First thing I want to point out, we've got Capital Corps, who is going to give you an overview of what this is all about. Capital Corps was instrumental in finding this money and guiding us through the application process. So Capital Corps will walk through that and providing recommendations. And then our staff will walk through the application. The important thing I wanted to start out to make sure everybody is aware, board especially, is that this application, it'll be covered again, but just up front, this application is due February 28th to DWR. We will not have an opportunity to get board approval of this application before that, the next meeting, unless we have a special meeting. The next meeting is on March 9th. So we do need to get, if it works for the board, we do need to get board approval today on the application package so that we can, with any changes or comments, so that we can finalize it, and get it to DWR on time. And with that, I'll turn it over to Capital Corps. I think it's Michael McKinney and Jeff Simonetti. One or both will be doing the initial presentation. Michael, okay.
Thank you, Steve. This is Michael McKinney, and good morning to the members of the board and to the public. The package that you have before you is the culmination of work that actually began in March of last year with regard to the state budget. An item within the state budget put in approximately $60 million for critically overdrafted basins through what they call the Sigma implementation program at DWR. These are grants that will be awarded by the agency. The application, as Steve said, is due February the 28th. The grant provides up to $7.6 million per critically overdrafted basin in the first round for planning activities or implementation activities with regard to the GSP. The application must include $10 million or more of a funding plan for prioritized projects. So what DWR was simply asking for was at least $10 million in a funding plan within the application to award $7.6 million. And then if any funds were available after that fact, it would be made available through the same application back to the critically overdrafted basin if there is an additional round. I'm going to say it's probably unlikely there will be an additional round, so this will be a $7.6 million application to DWR, and that's probably what we are going to receive. DWR has indicated to us that this is some of the last available funding for planning activities associated with projects in the critically overdrafted basins. That means that in round 2 and 3, funds available to critically overdrafted basins will be for implementation only and not for planning. While there are limited planning funds available in Prop 68, they're becoming harder and harder to come by at DWR, and planning dollars, especially associated for the interconnection project, would only be available through the governor's new drought resilience program, and that remains pending within the legislature, so it is by far a certain thing at this particular time. Our recommendations upon our discussions with DWR and upon our seeking approval of the process, the application process that needed to go through, basically what we are indicating at this time is that we are recommending that the interconnection project be the primary focus of the application. The recommendations of DWR were that we cut deep, not wide, for a particular project, meaning that we do not spread funding around, that we actually show accomplishment by focusing the funding application into a particular area, and that we maintain trueness to the GSP projects. So of the listed projects within the GSP, the ones that we discussed during our scoping meetings with DWR were the interconnection project, the water recycling plant, and the City of Ridgecrest's wastewater treatment plant. DWR gave us feedback on the City of Ridgecrest's wastewater treatment plant, indicating that while it was necessary in order to construct the water recycling plant, it was secondary to that, and that we really should focus more on the interconnection project and the water recycling plant, moving the wastewater treatment plant off of the list. During our scoping meeting, we were asking for anywhere from $6 million to $11 million in initial planning, which includes route design, engineering, studies, rights-of-way acquisition, facilities design, and permitting. We scoped out $6 million in initial planning for facilities design, affluent pipeline route and design, engineering studies and permitting activities, and then we also discussed with them the $5 million shortfall in the wastewater treatment plant. From that point on, once we had an approved process, we gave that process back to Stetson, and it has been followed and has been developed into the application that you have before you at this time. We continue to have scoping meetings with US EPA and Bureau of Reclamation. In fact, our scoping meeting with the US EPA on the water recycling plant, which is our focus with them, is tomorrow afternoon. We will be discussing the interconnection project, and we will be discussing the wastewater treatment plant with US EPA as well. But our focus will be on the water recycling plant, given the application status that you have before you. The reason that we made the recommendation concerning the interconnection project is specific to the fact that these are some of the last planning dollars that we see. If we have a $6 to $11 million requirement, I believe Stetson shows $8.8 million in total planning needs now that they have really refined this. We're still going to be approximately $500,000 short because some of the activities listed in the application as it is right now will be eligible for implementation dollars. Specifically, those are right-of-way acquisition and right-of-way studies. We believe that those will be eligible for round 2, round $3. But in terms of true planning, this is some of the last funding that we are going to see at this particular time. And we're not seeing a lot of other programs that are available to the interconnection project for planning. Conversely, we do see funding at State Water Resources Control Board and through the infrastructure bill that the federal government passed that would afford itself to the wastewater treatment plant and the water recycling plant. The memo that you have details in your packets details what our full recommendations and analysis and findings on this have been. It has had extensive discussions with members of the staff and also members of the water district to discuss these priorities and go through them and why we're making the recommendation. I know that the process called for the PAC to make comments and that they have made comments. Those comments are also included into the packet. And my only indication, my only caution, I guess, in this is that if we move forward with this packet, during the funding period for the application, the determination of a route for the interconnection project must be made. So it will come ahead of the mid-2023 timeline that was included in the GSP. It'll push that activity forward in order for Stetson to complete the studies necessary to expend the grant and get the planning done for the interconnection route. And from there, I will take questions from the board on our recommendations as well as the process.
Thank you, sir. We'll bring it back to the board for any discussion.
It might be it might be good to have Joseph go through the PowerPoint and then get questions on the whole thing since they're both related.
Okay.
Okay. So Joseph or Jeff, are you going to walk through the PowerPoint?
Yes, Steve, this is Joseph. I'm not sure if Jeff is online, but I'll be happy to start walking through the PowerPoint right now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and I want to thank Michael for giving an overview of the grant opportunity. He's certainly been very instrumental in our working with DWR on this grant opportunity. We do have a few slides just to introduce, as Michael said, the grant in general. And I've got a couple slides that also document what we've got right now in the grant application. We also have a staff report and something that I'll touch on later, a resolution that we plan to include in the application, but we'll be going over that in a few minutes. This first slide is a lot of overlap with what Michael had indicated a few moments ago. I will mention, if we're going into the details of the application, that, as Michael said, this application is centered around a spending plan that outlines up to and exceeding $10 million in projects that the GA and the other applicants are considering as part of implementation of GSPs and Sigma compliance. And again, the GA is eligible to receive up to $7.6 million through this grant opportunity. The grant timeline is about 3.5 years worth of work starting in December 2021 and ending tentatively in June 30th of 2025. So we've got about 3.5 years worth of work, again, that we'll be, as Michael said, dedicating towards the imported water interconnection project at this time based on staff's recommendations. Now, going on to the next slide, I do want to mention something that is a key component for the application. This grant is a little different from ones that we've done for the GA in the past, in that we won't be competing with other critically overdrafted basins for the funding. We're anticipating that we will be rewarded the $7.6 million so long as our application meets all of the requirements in the grant guidelines and solicitation package. And secondly, that we document in our application a project review and selection process that DWR is requiring. In lieu of the competition for funding between other basins, DWR was looking for the GA and the other applicants to select and compete internally on what projects would be the most competitive and the most viable for the guidelines and the benefits that are listed in this grant opportunity. They want this project review process documented in the spending plan, but they left it up to the GA and the applicants to determine what that process would be. And as Michael mentioned, we've been in close contact with DWR about our review process, and their staff has agreed with what we've done so far on this process. And I'll just walk through that very briefly. We envisioned a two-phase approach to this project review process, the first starting around November when the guidelines and the solicitation package were released. Staff developed a preliminary project listing and scoring based on evaluation criteria that DWR advised that we use when considering all of our projects. Staff developed that project listing and scoring and released it to the PAC and the TAC in late November for their comments and their proposed scoring of the projects. And in that listing, we, I think, had 5 projects that we were considering, and we've since added a 6th project based on feedback we received from the representative of the Navy a few board meetings ago that we consider a conservation feasibility study in this grant. So you'll see that when we get to the next slide, that we have added that project as well. We gave the PAC and the TAC a few weeks to review our project listing and scorings and, again, provide feedback to us. And we certainly considered those comments that we received when we developed the spending plan application and the other materials that are in your board packet. Now, the second phase of this process is actually what we're supposed to be doing today at this board meeting. We're looking for the board to review and potentially approve and give us direction on the projects and the priorities for funding. As Michael mentioned, staff is recommending that we focus solely on the imported water interconnection project as the requested grant project. Now, moving on to the next slide, this is an overview of what we're including in the spending plan so far. Again, this is in your board packet. It's the very first table in the spending plan that lists the projects that the GA is considering in order of their priority, with the number 1 priority project being the imported water interconnection project. And again, we've got that project as well as a water recycling project, data gap evaluation, data collection and monitoring program, annual reporting project for the GSP, a pumping optimization investigation, and the conservation feasibility study. Now, in the interest of time, I won't go through all of these projects in detail, but I will say that the scopes, the estimated project costs, and the schedules that are shown on this table and in the spending plan were all developed only to fit within the requirements of this grant in particular. And as Michael said, these costs and these schedules are meant to, again, fit the timeline of the grant, fit the eligible cost requirements in the solicitation package, and sort of mold these costs into what is available as far as funding. And again, as Michael said, we're requesting, as the spending plan is written right now, we're requesting that we receive $7.3 million for the imported water interconnection project, and the remaining $300,000 available of the $7.6 million will be for grant management and administration, and that includes things like quarterly reporting, regular coordination with DWR on our grant agreement that we anticipate executing, grant completion reports, and all other requirements that our grant agreement will outline. And this is similar to what we have in our existing Prop 1 and Prop 68 grant agreement. We do have budget in there as well for grant reporting, so this is nothing out of the ordinary. Now, moving on to the last slide, we had envisioned just discussing why we are recommending the imported water interconnection project as the highest priority for several reasons, and the main one being that based on the conclusions that we made in the GSP, even with recycled water being fully available to use to either reduce demands or replenish the basin, we can't achieve sustainability in the basin without an imported water supply, and we can't envision any opportunities for future growth in the community or even sustaining the community as it is right now without an imported water supply and without further contributing to undesirable results in the basin. And as Michael said earlier, there are limited opportunities for planning dollars for the imported water interconnection project other than this Sigma IP grant. And the reason we are not recommending other projects is that there are already funding structures in place for certain projects, or as Michael said, there are other outside funding opportunities for other projects like the water recycling project. And so what we're looking for today, and this is again mentioned in the staff report, we're looking for the board to discuss the project priorities as they're listed right now and potentially approve selection of the imported water interconnection project as the highest priority that we'll be including in the spending plan. We're looking for the board to consider adopting the authorizing resolution to submit the grant application and enter into an agreement with the state for grant funding. The resolution does need to be included in the application materials. And as Steve mentioned earlier, we won't have another opportunity to adopt this resolution unless we have a special meeting. And lastly, we're looking for the board to authorize staff to finalize the application and submit by the February 28th deadline. And I'll just mention we, again, have been working very closely with DWR on our spending plan application. We've actually met with our grant manager, I believe it was last week, to go over the draft of the spending plan application. We're anticipating more coordination with our grant manager to make sure that we meet all of the requirements because this application is so unique compared to other ones. And we may actually have a draft ready to submit in advance of that deadline. So with that, Steve, I'll turn it over to you and potentially the board to discuss the projects.
Okay, I think that's it. Ready for either public or board questions.
Okay, we'll go ahead and bring it to the public for public comment. Any public comment from the floor?
Oh, now it's on. That helps. Wes Katzenstein, domestic well owner and member of the PAC. And I had really two questions. We drove back from Palmdale yesterday, and I'm always amazed at how many greenhouses we're seeing popping up in California City. You know, the marijuana capital of something. And I worry that we may find that this water that we're hoping to get out of that pipeline may end up being spoken for. Or we may be competing with California City for that water. And I wonder, is it something that should be an early part of that plan to be sure that that water is indeed available to us when we believe we'll be ready for it? So that would be my first question. It would seem like that should be a critical element of the plan. And then the other question I have, it would seem to me that as you move forward with this plan, that we should have some hard objectives. We should maybe outline those pretty soon. Is the goal to have a plan that's shovel ready? What do we expect to come out of this? You know, presumably we want to be in a position we can apply for the next type of funding that we need to execute the project. So I'm assuming that there will be some very specific focused objectives that get us to some next kind of plateau and where we're headed. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, if you'd like me to address it, this is Michael McKinnon.
Yes, go ahead, Michael.
So the pipe for the imported water does not necessarily mean that the water will come from AVEC. It may come from an outside source. That is to be determined and still part of water negotiations that are ongoing within our task one, which is to find water. That is, so it, this is the pipe, the physical infrastructure and planning of it. Secondarily, the grant application and the timeline that we have to submit to DWR concerning these funds, as well as the hard expenditure date for these funds, will force a timeline to be developed and adhered to. The way that the legislature has basically said this is that if it is not expended 18 months from June 30th, 2024, the legislature can claw that money back. And so the grant application itself has to have a very tight deadline, and we have to demonstrate that we can meet those requirements within the time in order to be awarded the funding.
Yeah, really two follow-up questions. This is Wes Katzenstein again. Does the pipe have the capacity to meet both our needs and any needs that not worrying so much about the source of the water? I think your point is well taken. But does the pipe have the capacity, or do we need to be sure that it will have the capacity to serve both our needs and California City's needs, irrespective of the source of water? I would think that would be something you would look at as part of this planning. And my other comment was really in the hard deadline that you're working towards. It seems like we should, at the outset, have some very clear objectives as to what our product will be in that hard timeline. And I would hope our objectives would carry us to a place that we would be in a position to apply for the next type of funding. I don't know if shovel-ready is the right word to use, but we need to be, I think, very clear in what our objectives are in this tight timeline. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. So, Mr. Chairman Heyman, so I believe it's my understanding that in previous discussions, that the pipeline would be sufficient for the forecasted needs, along with a future growth rate and of what we estimate, 1.5% of the city or the basin as a whole. Let's just say that.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, West was asking more about California cities. California cities are served by AVEC. So if AVEC is our partner, then that'll go into the negotiations to make sure they've got enough water for California cities and their future and us. If it's another source, then we'll bring our own source to the table, which could be table a state water project entitlement. So I think we've got it. We're looking out for that in both cases.
And in your previous question, Wes, I think it's safe to say we're working very diligently on pursuing the purchase of imported water to have ready to meet those needs. So that's an ongoing process in itself right now.
Wes Katzenstein again. Yeah, I recognize everybody's working real hard, and it's heading in a very positive direction. And my question is, what is it, an 8-inch pipeline? I'm trying to remember the size of the pipeline. No, it's got to be bigger than that. But can that pipeline carry enough water? Are we going to have? Is the pipeline big enough in diameter to, no matter where the water comes from, whether it's AVEC or the water we're trying to buy, does the pipe have the capacity to move the water, the pipe itself?
Yeah, and the answer is it will be, yes. It'll be designed to serve this basin for all the needs we've talked about for this basin. One of the options from AVEC is that it would originate from California cities. So the pipelines serving California cities would serve California cities, and they have enough capacity of that pipeline. What we need to make sure they've got enough capacity on that pipeline that serves California cities, and there's enough left over for us to pick it up there and bring it farther north.
That was my question. We need to be sure that's the case.
For sure. Yes.
Any other public comment from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines.
Hello?
Yes, caller, go ahead.
Yeah, this is Renee Westolusk. I just need some clarification between what the recycled water project is going to recycle, will it be recycling water from the wastewater treatment plant, or is there recycled water via treating non-potable water from the basin? If you could clarify the difference between recycled water project and the wastewater treatment plant. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. This is Steve here. Yeah, you may be talking about the wastewater treatment facility as a comparison possibly to the brackish water project. I'm not sure, but we do have brackish water in the basin. The recycled water project is strictly wastewater treatment, and it's the city's project to expand the existing wastewater treatment facility that we would be participating with, and we are participating with in our technical group, and then the additional treatment that may be needed for the beneficial uses, and including a tertiary or possibly beyond tertiary treatment, and then the facilities that may be needed to actually put that water to beneficial use. All recycled water, yes, wastewater.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Next caller. Okay, seeing no further public comment, we'll bring it back to the board for discussion.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure there was recognition in the grant planning part when it's going to come to right-of-way. In the Bureau of Land Management, we're going to be your shepherds through that process, at least through a major portion of it. The right-of-way acquisition, there will be a rental cost. I would see that as implementation phase. But your planning phase, I think that the cost of planning, the cost recovery that we're going to have to expect from the board is probably at the tail end of this planning phase. And so it sounds like there is some more ceiling in the allowable grants that you can ask for. I just wanted to make sure the Capital Corps and the board understood that those costs would probably come at the tail end of this planning phase. And the reason it's important to open the right-of-way application before you're completely engineered is to have those resource discussions with us to make sure that there are no showstoppers and that you get the path correct. So kind of an iterative process. You know, you get your level 1 engineering, bring it to us, show us, open the file, and then we will refine the design, expecting you to basically bring in level 2, level 3 designs going forward. Then, culminating, I guess, I'm making the assumption that we'll do an environmental impact statement because of the expected length of the pipeline, assuming that the water and the pipeline have to come through Cal City, just making that assumption. But I wanted to make sure that since you had the opportunity to ask for more money, you consider the cost recovery process for the right-of-way application. Okay.
The gentleman is correct. The right-of-way portions of this would be considered more implementation phase. It is a gray area within DWR's definitions. There is 250, if you were to look at the budget analysis laid out for the interconnection project, there's 256,000, Steve, for right-of-way within this planning stage. It is our opinion that is eligible for round 2 funding. DWR has not given us a hard answer on that at this time. We're still working with them on it, but we assume that is eligible for implementation phase funding, but it is included here in the $8+ million that makes up the planning phase of the interconnection project.
Hey there, it's John Vallejo. Mr. Chair, may I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm just looking because there's 2 different versions of the self-scoring criteria, as far as I can tell. And in the first version, I'm looking at section in general, the second box, and there's possible points of 4, and the actual points is 0. And that happens a few times for the different components. and then later on there's another scoring table that's blue that appears to give us 4 out of 4 points. And I'm wondering which is our self-score. Is it 0 or is it 4 for those items? And if it is 0, I was just unclear as to why we wouldn't have described the quantifiable benefits of those respective projects.
Joseph, do you have an answer for that?
Yes, Director Vallejos. So the Table 1 in the spending plan, which is I think one of the first pages of the actual application, that has a column for the estimated score for each of the projects and a sum of the total score. And then a few pages down, the first couple pages under Attachment A of the application, those are the tables of the scoring that we'll be submitting to DWR.
Okay, I see those tables. I guess I'm seeing 2 copies of those tables. The first set of the tables are green in Attachment A. And for example, on component number 1, the imported water interconnection project, the second row, we have an actual points of 0 listed out of 4. Are you with me there?
Yes, I see. So those.
And then just to compare that, this is where my confusion is. If you go down a number of pages to tables that are actually below a bunch of text, but these tables are now blue, and they appear to be the same table. And they're a little bit different in terms of their format, but they appear to be the same rows in general. And I see like a 4 out of 4 in that same row for project number 1, the imported water interconnection project. And there's a bunch of red text next to that. Are you following me? Okay. So I'm wondering, are those the same tables? And if they're the same, why is there a difference in the scoring, apparent scoring, and which one are we actually going to be submitting is where my question is surrounding.
Yes, thank you for making that observation. As I said, we're planning to actually submit, as far as a final scoring, the tables that are in green and orange and red, the first ones that you had mentioned. The ones in blue are the ones that we had submitted to the PAC and the TAC for their review a few months ago. And the reason that we're including that is because we want to demonstrate to DWR that we went through this process with the PAC and the TAC of reviewing and selecting and scoring the projects at a preliminary level. So those tables in blue are the preliminary scorings and listings of the projects that we sent to the PAC and the TAC a few months ago. Now, again, those are not the final scorings because the scoring criteria that DWR has released were modified slightly since we released that to the PAC and the TAC. And again, we're just including this to document that we went through this process, that we sent a preliminary scoring to the PAC and the TAC. They gave us some feedback, and we've considered that feedback into the final scoring, which is the first set of tables that you had mentioned.
Okay. I appreciate that explanation. That's understandable. I guess I'm wondering, wouldn't we know the quantifiable benefits in terms of if we do import the water at the levels we've discussed in our GSP, basically the adverse effects that we would be avoiding by doing that? And so wouldn't we be able to describe those quantifiable benefits?
That's a good question. The reason why we've, for example, for imported water interconnection, we've got a 0 under that particular row is because that item or that question number 2 is separated based on whether the actual work that we'll be doing under this project is considered part of planning work or part of implementation work, and that implementation being construction. And so because most of the work that we're applying for this imported water interconnection project is still in the planning phase, we were advised by DWR to leave blank or score 0 to any of the rows or any of the scoring questions that we didn't think would apply for that particular project. So because this isn't considered an implementation project as it's written right now. We've left that as a 0.
Okay, that answers my question. I appreciate your response there.
Okay, yeah, of course.
Could I make another comment about your planning phase? I didn't pick up from this whether or not you're also planning for CEQA, because BLM is going to help you through NEPA, but if you need to cross state or other jurisdiction property, you're going to have to plan for CEQA. And $256,000 I heard, being planned for seems very low.
Steve, this is Joseph again. Can I respond?
Go ahead, Joseph.
Okay, thank you. I think we have budget tables as part of attachment D in the application. What's actually strange or unique, I guess, about this application is that DWR wasn't requiring very detailed or really any scopes of work to be included in the application. They're envisioning that in order to sort of streamline the process of getting the funding out, that not having scopes of work in the spending plan would, I guess, accelerate the process or the schedule of getting this funding distributed to the basins. We do have as attachment D, which is sort of a miscellaneous attachment where we can include any backup that would help DWR review our application. We have included high-level scopes of work and budget tables for each of the projects, and we did include budget items for what we think would be a joint CEQA NEPA study. I don't recall what it was that we budgeted for that study. I think it's above $256,000 though. But that is included in some of the budget tables at the very end of the application.
To clarify my remark, the 256 is simply for right-of-way studies associated with planning in this phase of the application. So it's not the total of right-of-way costs, nor is it the CEQA costs in that.
This is Chairman Heyman. And so would any increased CEQA costs incurred down the road would the budget still be able to absorb that? Without affecting other allotted areas of the budget or on the grant? I guess this is directed toward Michael.
Gosh, I was going to kick that over to Joseph.
Okay.
The grant does not cover all of the planning costs associated with this. So if there were increased costs associated with CEQA, they may go into that beyond funded, because there's currently an $8 million plus total cost associated with planning of the interconnection project. We're obviously only applying 7.3, so we'll have to go find additional funding in that. So I would think if there's any additional planning costs, they might have to be shoved into that additional funding area. Would you agree with that, Joseph or Steve?
Yes, Michael, I agree with that completely. And I thank you for mentioning that. Again, these budget tables and these scopes of work for these projects are, again, meant to reflect what we can do within the time frame of the grant, which is June 30th, 2025. What can we do in 3.5 years worth of time? And again, we are not sure if we can completely finish all CEQA and NEPA studies and components within that time frame, but we've certainly budgeted, I think, a good amount to at least make very substantial progress in reaching that goal of finishing those environmental requirements.
Very good. Any other comments from the board?
I have a few comments. Is the mic working?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I've got a number of comments here, actually. Contrary to rumors to the contrary, The Water District supports the imported water project. In fact, the top 4 priority projects of the GA and the Water District are similar, if not identical. The project is the GA number 1 priority, is the district's number 4 priority, and the GA wants to spend all the available grant money on their number 1 priority, imported water, as we've just heard. There's a philosophical difference between a water district and the GA. The water district wants to address the low-hanging fruit, and that includes water recycling, pumping optimization, and data gaps. Okay, so what do we consider low-hanging fruit, or what's the definition? First of all, it needs to be affordable. Second, it has to be locally controlled. Third, low risk. And fourth, it has to have a short-term payoff or benefit. If we look at imported water, it's very expensive, no short-term benefit, and high risk. Clearly, the Water District does not agree with the GA priority strategy. I want that to be clear. That said, I understand and appreciate the need to obtain grant funding. I will go along with the current staff recommended grant proposal. Don't like it, but I'll go along. However, I also know that all projects need to be funded one way or another. The Water District will not support any follow-on imported water projects until funding for all Water District priority projects has been addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Director Rotora. Any other comments from board members?
Director Heyman, I'd like to make a motion to approve staff's recommendation.
So we have a motion. Do we have a second?
This is John Blahill. I'll second.
We have a second.
Chairman Peters,
Aye.
Vice Chair Heyman,
Aye.
Director Vallejo,
Aye.
Director Itmeyer,
Aye.
Director Rotora.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Okay, moving on to item number 10, board review and approval of policy on temporary use. This will be presented by Stetson.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Acting Chairman. That was great. That was a big step. So we've got somebody. I realized, everybody, that we've got a lot of cost with imported water, but this does get us started, which is you gotta. I always say you got to start before you finish. So we're getting started. I want to try to be quick on a couple of these. This policy on temporary short-term uses of groundwater supply, we've all seen it multiple times. It was originally put together by our council, Keith Lemieux, GA council, and Water District council, legal counsel Jim Worth. That's the policy you see in the packet, is that what they put together. This was originally brought forward by the Water District in relation to some pumping that needed to be done to support some Navy activities, some temporary housing and such. And as most of you are aware, Navy has a Federal Reserve right. If they pumped it themselves, it wouldn't apply to, it would be a part of the sustainable yield, but it wouldn't have fees attached to it, whereas the Water District did. So the Water District brought this forward, and it sort of developed into a policy for all kinds of potential temporary uses, emergency, spills, leaks, all kinds of things. So it got big, then it got small, and now we got it small. And the way the policy is set up is essentially board discretion on any waiver of assessments for temporary uses. Staff, if there was an application submitted, staff would prepare a staff report, make a recommendation to the board. The board would evaluate it, along with the applicant would certainly be a part of it, and the board would make a decision on any waivers for a temporary use if it qualified. I will say, we've said this before, but I'm going to say it here again. It's our view, I think it's staff's general view, that we don't necessarily need a policy to do that. Anybody who is subject to pumping assessments can make a request to the board for a waiver for whatever reasons and bring it to the board, and the board has the discretion to do what they want. You don't need to have a policy. But this sort of developed into this kind of approach based upon the Water District request for this and staff and legal counsel participation. So the policy hasn't changed. You've seen it before. We did delay bringing it to the board in order to run this policy through the PAC and request from the PAC an evaluation and any real recommendations to be made to the policy. I'll just give you a heads up. In the staff report, which is the next slide, I listed the general comments from the PAC before the PAC meeting, only because I talked to David. I kind of knew where it was, and as it came back, they were very close. What you see on the next slide for the, excuse me, I better talk closer, for the PAC meeting recommendations might be a little different here than you'll see in David's report, but I think the essence is there. The first one is probably one of the most important. There was a strong sense from the PAC that all water produced from the basin needs to be accounted for as part of the sustainable yield. You just can't leave anything out, and we agree with that. As part of that, the PAC's first comment, one of the first comments was they really didn't see the need for this policy, that we could do without it, and we should account for all water. Other comments made from the PAC, which we included here, included things like, if you're going to give a waiver, you need to deduct the amount of pumping you waived from the following year's sustainable yield. In other words, full accounting of all pumping, which we agree with that too. And I think that was, and also to be very careful with what you call a temporary use and what you even consider for a waiver, which is case by case subject to the board discretion. So we agree with that too. So the comments we got, I think that was pretty much it. If David has more, we can certainly comment when we're done here. Right now, as part of the staff report, staff is not necessarily recommending to the board that you approve this temporary use policy, but we were asked to prepare it, so we're bringing it back. So we're basically asking the board to consider and discuss it. If there's any changes you'd like to make based on the PAC comments, or if you would rather not have a policy, we're fine with whatever the board decides. But we're bringing it to the board so that we can, from staff's perspective, put it to bed, because we've been looking at it for probably 6 months. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions from the board.
Thanks, Steve. We'll bring back for public comment. Any public comment from the floor?
May I comment?
Yes. Anyone on public comment? We're going to take discussion with Dave first.
Yeah, I'd like to clarify what the PAC actually decided and voted on 7-0. It was unanimous out of that January 26th meeting. And it's contained in the PAC comments that we were going to, or the PAC report later on, but it's germane to this issue. And it further clarifies what Steve had as really the results of our preliminary discussion at the November PAC meeting. So the final agreement for our statement from the PAC contained 6 items. We were unanimous in stating that, in principle, there should be no uncompensated for excess pumping above allocation in the basin, and therefore, theoretically, no need for such a policy. However, we also recognize the potential for unforeseen emergency temporary use circumstances, but strongly emphasize the need to limit these temporary emergency circumstances to the absolute minimum and not allow any uncompensated, simple temporary use only above allocation, except for the need to explore gaps and potential new water sources in the basin that would not otherwise be conducted without such a waiver. Number 3, the PAC recognizes the policy provides a process and method for application in such very limited, unforeseen circumstances. Simple, temporary, short-term use outside emergency circumstances or the gap new water investigation does not meet that criteria. Therefore, the PAC supports the overall policy with the listing of temporary emergency uses under items 2 through 5 on the draft policy, but does not support the wide open, unrestricted, temporary use only circumstances offered under number 1. Additionally, the PAC recommends an objective time limit guideline for temporary usage and as well as a criteria guideline perhaps for amount. You know, a guideline for the length of time, what is temporary, and what is a limited amount that would be generally recognized for applications 2 through 5. The PAC recommends that this process, of course, be fully public and transparent to ensure the maximum stakeholder confidence in the effort. So that was the agreement that the PAC reached unanimously out of that meeting. So it modifies a little bit of what you've seen here. We certainly do not approve or do not recommend approving the example number 1, and we would, in truth, we would rather see this defined as a temporary emergency use policy, not just a temporary or short-term use policy. Temporary emergency. Questions for me?
Any questions from the board?
None here.
Okay, hearing none, we'll go ahead and move to public comment from the floor.
Judy Decker. I would like to further emphasize some of the negative things that David said about this policy. While I am on the PAC, I was ill and could not stay for all of the meeting and was not in on the final discussion of this topic. This is a really, really poor policy. It has no parameters, no criteria. It is a solely subjective document as it is written. And I think as it stands, as you have it before you, it is open for abuse on both sides by the staff and by the applicant. If he doesn't get what he wants, lawyers are plentiful. I hope you abandon this policy. If you want an emergency policy, that's totally different. And I will again remind all of you that the water district, I don't know about this in your current CSD, but the water district has a temporary water use policy already. Mr. Construction, who needs water to grade off a piece of land, has to get a construction meter from the water district and pays for the water that they use. That's a temporary use. So anything that is involved within the boundaries of the water district is already taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Any other public comment from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, this is Renee Westerlusk, and I'm also a member of the PAC, but I'm also a water district customer, and I think this policy doesn't answer about the fees that are being waived. Who's eventually going to pay for those, or will the board members need to decide, are you just going to let those fees go unpaid and not try to make them up and put them on the backs of the water district customers the following year because you lost replenishment fees and I believe pumping fees if you waive those? Because this policy doesn't answer that question, and I'd like to know what the board members think about if you're going to waive fees, then do you put them on the backs of all the rest of the water users in the valley that have to pay replenishment and pumping fees. That's my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Any board members want to take a stab at that?
I guess I would like to comment that, this whole process started, I think probably, Steve said 6 months ago, I think it's more like a year ago, due to a water district request. And that request was put on hold because we thought, well, this might be a bigger thing, and we should look at it more, study it, and we've studied it, and we've studied it, and we've talked about it. And my feeling is that we've studied it to death at this point in time. We're never going to have a perfect outcome. I think it's a good starting place for where we are. It can be modified if we need to modify it. On the other hand, I'd also be okay if we all unilaterally, or together, decided we didn't need a policy. That would also be okay. But we've got something that's been worked on. We've spent a lot of money developing it, and I think we unless we decide we don't want a policy, period, we should approve the one we have, because otherwise we'll never get it done.
Thank you, Director Rator. Next caller, please. Okay, seeing no further public comment, we'll bring it back to the board for a motion.
So move. Oh, pardon me. So move.
Do we have a second?
Director Heyman, just wanted to jump in real quick. It sounds like there's some general concern. We've heard from Mr. Janis, from Judy Decker, Stan's comments. If there's already a policy in place through the water district, and there's some concerns over how this is going to play out, and as Steve said, this has been ongoing for about 6 months now. I'm not sure that this is the time to enact this. I think we can get by all right without this policy. So if anybody else wanted to jump in and add their thoughts, just kind of my 2 cents on it right now.
And just so I'm clear on it, we could make our decisions without this policy in place.
I think so. I think we can get by without this policy.
Yeah, this is John Vallejo, and I'm hesitant to second this as well, given the concerns of the PAC members. I think given this is could be such an important policy item, and we want to make sure it is something that the community supports. I'm okay with maybe further refining this or taking a look at what the concerns are specifically, and maybe absorbing any specific requests for modifying the draft proposal. So I'm okay with bringing this forward again at a future meeting. I'm not necessarily opposed to having a policy, but I'm not ready to take the lead on saying this is the one today.
Agreed.
Thank you, Director Vallejo and Director Peters. I would say I'm in the same position where I think we could, based on concerns that have been voiced, I think we are capable of making decisions on the emergency use or temporary use needs, and if we find that we run into problems with it, then I guess we'll have to bring it back before the board and address those issues. But at this point, I'm in favor of us moving along without the policy. So let's, any comments from Director Ittmeyer?
None right now. I think other than I'm comfortable just kind of waiting and until there's a clear need.
Thank you, Director Ittmeyer. So based on that, I think we have a majority to, at this point in time, shelve this and continue on without a policy. So is there any other, do we need a vote on that or just? Okay. So motion died for lack of a second. All right. So we will move on to item number 11, board review and approval of shallow well mitigation policy. And this again will be with Steve with Stetson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this one is a lot like the temporary use policy. We've been looking at this for many, many months. The actual policy itself that we put together, it's an important policy. It was actually called out, we'll hear later. I think Carol's going to talk about it. It was called out in our DWR approval as one of the highlights of the GSP that we did address shallow well impacts, or at least in the GSP, and plan to address them going forward. They were complimentary of that. So this is an important policy we're working on. The policy hasn't changed much since you've seen the several meetings. It hasn't really changed much. We've gotten some comments from the PAC and the TAC. Out of the policy itself, probably the biggest change that we've made is the time from a completed application to a staff report to the board was reduced from 90 to 45 days. It was felt that 90 was way too long. The concept of the basic shallow well impact mitigation policy being a reimbursement policy for the well owner, the shallow well owner, I think everybody's pretty comfortable with that at this point. So that's how the policy is right now. Other important comments that we received from the PAC and the TAC that we've heard many times, and at this point what we do is try to address it, and in order to give the board the opportunity to talk about it and maybe suggest that we add those into the final policy and bring it back if that's what the board wants to do. We did add an optional emergency assistance application process whereby it sort of changes the face of the authority for shallow well impact mitigation and puts the authority and the staff in more of an active role, not as much of a reimbursement, although it could be reimbursement too in an emergency. If the well owner went forward, it could be reimbursement for their cost, or the authority could move forward and address emergency situations on a case-by-case basis. So we did add this. It's not in the real policy, but if the board chooses to add this to the policy, we could revise that, include it, and either bring it back or take the recommendation from the board and revise it and consider it as adopted and final. The emergency option includes basically a form, which we haven't prepared yet because we didn't know if the board would like to have this provision, would be an emergency application form that we would have an applicant fill out and provide to the general manager. It also includes an allocation of funds out of the shallow well mitigation fund at the discretion of, at least the way it's written right now, at the discretion of the general manager and the chairman of the board, that if an emergency application came in and there was a staff report or a report developed by the staff so indicating a recommendation to apply funds toward this emergency application, that the general manager and the board chair would have discretion to apply funds. Obviously, it would be it will have to be documented and all the records kept, but that's so that the authority could act quickly in an emergency nature. It also indicates that the authority would maintain a contractors and professionals list to provide support for shallow well owners that could do evaluations, could do some light plumbing work if it was needed, pump testing work, lowering of pumps, things like that. We would have a contractors list that would be available to the staff and to the shallow well owners if they needed access to outside help. And then part of the key part of this probably is that upon a completed emergency application, that there would be a 3-day, and I didn't put calendar or work day. Right now it's a 3-day, which if it was on a Friday, it would be pushing it to get it out by Monday or Tuesday, but we'll figure that out. But basically a 3-day turnaround, understanding that some of the comments from the PAC attack were that if somebody has an emergency, they might be out of water, so we need to turn this around and get them haul water or a temporary pipe or something pretty quickly. So that's the emergency option options that we can add to the policy. And with that, we'll be open to questions or board questions, and then we've included a staff report with a recommendation and whatever changes or additions to the policy the board would like, the staff will make.
Thank you, Steve. We'll bring it back to public comment from the floor. Any public comment?
Excuse me, Don Decker. I'm a member of the TAC and also the chairman of the Domestic Well Owners Association. The document as it exists right now obviously has had a huge amount of work put into it by staff, and I think also comments from both the PAC and the TAC. We could continue to refine, obviously, more or less indefinitely. One thing that will really be important is to get some actual experience with some well failure situations and how it actually goes down, and what improvements can be made obviously can be addressed as another step. My only comment, a negative comment about the whole forum affair as it exists right now, is I think it's still too complex. It's unnecessarily complex as an application. A lot of the detail will be supplied by the well condition report that will come from the licensed well repair service outfit. It's not necessary to have a lot of that in the upfront. Other than that, I think that a lot of hard work has gone in. Some of it's been dead end in a way, but I think we've got something that's usable. I still recommend some improvements in wording and shorten things up even more, but we're at a point where you've got something at least that I think most of us can agree with my caveat. Don't forget that. Thank you.
Thank you, Don. Any other public comment from the floor? Seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. We have no public comment on the phone, so we'll bring it back to the board for discussion.
I was wondering if we could get the PAC chairman to comment on where the other PAC member are thinking about this.
Yeah, I have nothing really specific to add. All the comments have been incorporated or addressed, all PAC member comments with regards to that policy. We have reviewed it several times. There were concerns over some of the implementation timeliness, the emergency nature, as Steve expressed. That was the primary one, and having it clear and easy, because as mentioned, most of the folks affected by this are small pumpers, and in fact, they will be in an emergency if their well goes dry or bad in this situation, and therefore it's the need to respond quickly. I think, as Don expressed, and Steve, most of the members have seen this, reviewed it, commented on it repeatedly, and would also get the thing out there. And we can adjust if we need to later, but we need to have the policy written down. So in general, they support it. There's specific comments one way or the other, but overall, we were supporters of this originally, very much having a shallow well mitigation plan.
Would the PAC also support the emergency aspect, that the additional aspect of it on this plan?
Yes, I believe the PAC would. I'm speaking for 8 or 9 people, but right now voting members that remain on the PAC. We haven't conducted a vote on it, but my sense from all the comments is they would support that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Director Torra. I just have a brief comment. So in the past, we discussed a little bit about, so I understand the emergency need and response when that arises, but in looking at an individual that has a chronic lowering of their well, and so in a preventative standpoint, does this, as it stands, cover addressing that situation where, a person has X depth of a well and they're seeing a lowering of that, and so of their water table down to a point it makes sense to me to preempt things before that emergency failure and cost. And so do we feel like that instance would be addressed within this plan?
Yes, absolutely. That would be the regular program would cover that. Emergency would be somebody basically out of water.
Right.
Yep. The other part would be in the main policy.
Very good. Any other comments from the board?
I do want to say that, as a member of the PAC, part of the discussion was we don't want to basically replace or provide an insurance policy for people who don't do regular well maintenance. That was one of the things, is people need to be doing their regular maintenance. And as Don Decker pointed out, the well condition report is going to come in. And, perhaps one of the ways to address what Don said is to just put the clause in, including but not necessarily limited to that laundry list of things that Don was saying, or add complexity to making the application. Basically the well report, if it comes back clean, hey, the well owner has done his due diligence, but the water level dropped and his pump burned out, and and he's asking for relief. If it's that obvious, then perhaps all that's necessary is the well condition report. So I just want to mention that there is a simple way to make the adjustment today if you decide that you want to do that. So.
Very good. Thank you, Tom.
Just last comment I wanted to make, because the TAC, including Mr. Decker, has mentioned it before. From a staff perspective, any applications, any indications that we would see of an impacted shallow well, the staff doesn't stop at that well. We would be looking at it more regionally immediately as to whether or not there's going to be other impacts, whether or not there are solutions that are more regional than just solving that problem. That would be triggered under all situations. So I want to make sure that that's mentioned in the minutes, that is a part of the shallow well impact. Mitigation is always looking at the bigger solution to make sure that we get ahead of it if we do see a problem.
Very good. And so before we, do we have any other comments from the board? I think we do have a caller, so let's go ahead and move back to the call-in public comment. Caller, go ahead.
Hello, this is Renee West-Lusk again, and I am a member of the PAC, and I did review the shallow well mitigation plan, and I'm one of the people that strongly recommended we have some kind of emergency assistance procedure, because you don't know what can happen, and we have 832 shallow wells in this valley. And I think the emergency assistance procedure is imperative. And so I want to let you know I wasn't the only PAC member that wanted that in. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. Next caller. Okay, I believe that is it on the phone line. So back to what I was going to address earlier. So at this point, before we ask for a motion, do we want to have any type of agreement from the board as to, do we want to add this emergency add-on, I guess we'll call it, as presented by Steve before we ask for a motion? Does any board members have any comment, or does everybody agree to adding that on?
Director Heyman, could we get some more specific language maybe from staff before we put that on, or could we just approve this and then an amendment down the road? I don't know if staff's ready to share the language for that yet, but if they are, I'd like to hear that suggestion.
That's kind of my question too. Is it something we can add on later, or do we need to do it today so we can get this?
We could bring it back next time with the revised policy, with the optional emergency included, and for final approval. And then we don't have language right now, if that answers the question. All we did was outline what we thought the concept would be to make sure the board was agreeable.
And we could bring that on as an agenda item on our next meeting and have it ready and approve it at that time?
Yep.
Because I believe
Can I make the added suggestion that when we bring it back, we put it on consent, since we've essentially already had the discussion?
Right. Okay. Perfect.
Yep. I was going to suggest the same thing.
Okay. So if we don't have any further comment on that, then that will be the plan, and we will now move on to item number 12.
We need the motion and the vote.
Do we need a motion on that since we're going to have it under consent?
I'll make the motion, Director Heyman.
No policy.
I don't believe we're going to.
We don't need a motion. We're not taking action on the item. We'll take action at the next meeting.
Okay. We don't need a vote at this present time there, Director Peters. Okay, so moving on to item number 12, board review and discussion of Department of Water Resources approval letter of the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Sustainability Plan. This will be presented by Carol.
Thank you. Is that better? Okay. So it seems like we should have some balloons, confetti, some fanfare for this item. But the day after our last board meeting in January, we received notice from the Department of Water Resources that our groundwater sustainability plan for the Indian Wells Valley groundwater basin had been approved. And this is really a big deal. And I want to, I want to go through the package that they sent us. The package is 51 pages, and we didn't put it in the agenda packet. We thought it was long enough this month as it was. It is on our website for anyone to go in and take a look at it. But what we want to do with this opportunity is kind of break it down for you. First, I'll give you a little introduction. And hopefully won't spend too much time reviewing a lot of information you already know. Just give you an introduction here, and then we'll break down the approval package and talk about it and what our next actions are. So to start off with, the SGMA, or Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, identified critically overdraft basins and required GSPs, or groundwater sustainability plans, to achieve sustainability for those basins by the year 2040. So we all know Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Basin is identified as a critically overdraft basin. Our GSP was approved by the Groundwater Authority in January of 2020, and that was in accordance with SGMA requirements. The State Department of Water Resources had to review it by January 2020, and I think that was 2022, and then also had to give its approval. And so that's what we received. January 13th, we received that notice. So let's talk about how we got there, though, just for a few minutes. There were some significant milestones that were reached to get to that point for not only the Groundwater Authority, but also the community, everyone who's contributed, because the first step was to create the Groundwater Authority cooperatively. The Joint Powers Agency was created. There was lots of participation by stakeholders, by the public. All of that was put into a prioritization. The PAC, the Policy Advisory Committee, and the Technical Advisory Committees were created so that we could get more input from the community, from interested parties. The GSP was completed in compliance with SGMA, and we have now received DWR's approval with a variety of recommended corrective actions, and we'll talk about those here too in just a few minutes. A little bit more on the overview, and this is just, I think, some interesting information, especially for anyone who might think that the Department of Water Resources is rubber stamping these plans. There were 21 critically overdraft basins that had GSPs due in January of 2020. DWR has reviewed a total of 42 GSPs that had been submitted in January of 2020. And of that 42, 34, so most of them, were deemed incomplete or deficient. And DWR has approved only 8 GSPs that were submitted, including ours. And only 5 of the 39 GSPs submitted by critically overdraft basins were approved. Now, also interesting to note that there were no GSPs approved in San Joaquin Valley, and the Indian Wells Valley Groundwater Authority GSP was the only one approved for Kern County. So I think those are some interesting facts, but also it really says a lot for the effort that was put into this GSP, for the comprehensive nature of it. And I think the approval letter will show that as we go through it. But overall, I think it just says, wow, awesome job by the Groundwater Authority, by the Water Resource Manager and his team, and by all of the community that have contributed and supported the development of the plan. A lot of hard work, and it's paid off. We do have an approval. So let's talk a little bit more about what's in that approval letter. And so just to go on, sure, this was a huge task for the community. A little bit more about the development, the significant overdraft, limited water supplies, and the unique basin characteristics made complying with the SGMA requirements very difficult. You put in a lot of public involvement, stakeholder involvement, local technical input, a lot of work from the authority board, the PAC, the TAC, and some very strong-willed professionals in the community. But you've had to come together to make some really difficult decisions to create this GSP, but it's paid off. So implementation of this GSP, and we'll be making adjustments to it as we go along, as needed, but it's going to ensure a sustainable future for the Indian Wells Valley, for the city of Ridgecrest, for the China Lake Naval Air Weapons Station, and for the future. So, again, great job, everybody. So the approval package that we received has 3 components. There is an approval letter, basically a cover letter. There's a statement of findings from DWR staff, basically, citing how we've met the requirements of SGMA and the Water Code. And there is the bulkiest part of the report is the staff report, which also has a variety of components. Now, DWR determined its approval based on the staff report recommendation. That recommendation has a variety of recommended corrective actions to enhance the GSP for future evaluation. It strongly encourages that those recommended corrective actions be incorporated into our future updates. And our first 5-year GSP review or update is due about 3 years from now, January 31st, 2025. So here we're going to review what the findings were in the DWR statement of findings. First, that the GSP satisfies the required conditions of Section 355.4A of the GSP regulations It was submitted within the statutory deadline of January 31st, 2020. The plan's complete, and it covers the entire basin. The GSP also conforms with Water Code sections 10727.2 and .4 and is likely to achieve the sustainability goal for the basin. Additional findings, sustainable management criteria are sufficiently justified and commensurate with the level of understanding of the basin. And I think that's important to note. Now, recommended corrective actions don't materially affect the ability of our GSP to progress toward our sustainability goal or affect the likelihood of the GSP to attain that goal. And we'll, again, talk about those corrective actions that are recommended in just a few minutes. Another finding is that our GSP demonstrates a thorough understanding of data gaps and a commitment to eliminate those data gaps. That our projects and management actions are technically feasible and commensurate with level of understanding of the basin. So we have projects and management actions to mitigate the impacts to shallow wells. We're furthering our monitoring networks and our understanding of the basin. It includes a reasonable assessment of overdraft conditions and seeks to mitigate overdraft through implementation of our projects and management actions. And the GSP does not propose to end overdraft during, this is a finding, during the initial 20-year period or the 50-year planning horizon. Again, that's a recommended corrective action, and we'll talk about that momentarily. Finally, additional findings that the GSP provides detailed explanation on how varied interests of groundwater users were considered in developing the sustainable management criteria and how these interests, including domestic wells, would be impacted by minimum thresholds. Another finding that it appears the GSP will not adversely affect any adjacent basin. And finally, that the authority's groundwater management activities provide a reasonable level of confidence that the authority has legal resources necessary to implement our GSP and a plan to obtain the necessary financial resource. And I think we've been demonstrating that over the past year. Additionally, DWR statement of findings includes that the authority adequately responded to comments that raised credible technical or policy issues, that the GSP is in compliance with the requirements of SGMA and GSP regulations and appears to be consistent with the state policy regarding the right to human water. The GSP does not develop sustainable management criteria for the depletion of interconnected surface water or groundwater-dependent ecosystems. Yeah, I was trying to think of that word. Thank you. Citing insufficient data, the authority will, and this again is a finding, the authority will reevaluate the need to establish sustainability criteria for interconnected surface water and groundwater-dependent ecosystems as data gaps are filled. Again, a recommended corrective action. And also the finding that CEQA does not apply to our GSP evaluation and assessment. Then we move on to the staff report, which includes 5 sections. There's a summary, basically, of the report itself. There's the evaluation criteria that was used. It includes the required conditions or the requirements for DWR to evaluate the GSP. And then the plan assessment, which is a detailed assessment of the GSP contents. And then finally, the staff recommendation, which includes the DWR recommended corrective actions that will be considered for the first 5-year assessment of the GSP or update in about 3 years. And so now we're going to go into a little bit more detail to take a look at those recommended corrective actions, because I think it's important for everyone to understand what those are and how we plan to address them. But I'm not going to do that. At this point, we're going to have I think Jeff Helsley from Stetson to talk about the RCAs, the recommended corrective actions.
Thank you, Carol, and good afternoon, directors and everyone listening. The first recommended corrective action is that we provide additional information on the required ongoing communication elements required in the GSP regulations, and that we describe how the required elements fit into the authority's communication and engagement plan. There's a report from the PAC in your agenda package, agenda item number 15, that reports the PAC's recent discussion of the communication engagement plan and their recommendations. So that effort is already underway. And we anticipate there'll be additional discussions of communication and outreach, and that will be included in the update to the GSP at the 5-year update. Recommended correction action number 2 is to investigate the hydraulic conductivity of the vertical and lateral relationships between the 3 hydrogeologic zones within the shallow and deep principal aquifers to improve our understanding of potential mitigation of impaired waters and impacts to water levels. This is part of really the several data gap issues that we identified in the GSP that we will be addressing. One of the primary ways we're going to be looking at filling data gaps and evaluating data that we get as we try to fill those data gaps is by updating the basin's model. But that will be done through a configuration management plan that the Navy is required to be able to continue to use their model and to make changes to the model. We'll have the configuration management plan technical group put together, which will include the ad hoc modeling TAC that we used during preparation of the GSP and the Navy and others to discuss data that's already been collected and data we'll continue to collect to update the model, and also other data gap measures that we want to look at. Recommended corrective action number 3 is, as the water budget elements and values are updated during GSP implementation, that we should include groundwater pumping allocations. As the data is updated, including groundwater pumping allocations and imported water quantities, we should clearly explain the revised elements and values in our revised water budgets going forward, and explain all the information that's presented in the tables, and talk about impacts, which I think would be the positive impacts of imported and recycled water, and that we revise our climate change projections as we go forward, filling data gaps. We intend to address all of those issues in the 5-year update. Again, the model configuration management plan process will be used to look at all that and make recommendations on how we address climate change in the update. Recommended correction action number 4 is that when we update the GSP to include projects and management actions sufficient to eliminate perpetual overdraft in the 20 and 50-year time frames that we looked at, including a contingency plan if projects and management actions included imported water fail to produce the anticipated results. We believe that their comment about eliminating perpetual overdraft refers to table 3.8 in the plan, which shows the future water balances under our projects, under project implementation and management action implementation. The water budget does show that we balance the amount of groundwater that pumps with the natural and artificial recharge in the basin, but there still is evapotranspiration that occurs that is not met. So it does show a deficit, a much smaller deficit in the basin, or reduction in groundwater and storage out in the future than we have now. I'll point out, so that seems to be what they're commenting on. However, our comment is that the DWR's own guidance documents say that the GSP water budgets are not intended to be a direct measure of groundwater sustainability. And they go on to say that the sustainable yield is a maximum quantity of water that can be used annually from a groundwater supply on the long-term average without causing undesirable effects. And all of the modeling we did shows almost all of the wells, the water levels in all of the wells we looked at recover significantly once we get all of our implementation, our projects and management actions. So we avoid the undesirable effects, which is the definition of sustainable management, yet they seem to be commenting on the water budget itself. So we'll be addressing that. It can be addressed through the use of more imported water than we presented in the modeling scenario that the GSP is based on. We, in fact, did model that, adding more water than we were taking out. But the modeling showed, at least over the 50-year time frame, there wasn't a significant benefit to adding that additional water. But that's something we can reevaluate. And if the imported water project doesn't go forward, we'll be looking at other alternatives. I think the most obvious one would be looking at reducing pumping even further than we have anticipated in the GSP, which would be a very difficult thing to do. But we'll review all of that during the next few years as we prepare our 5-year update. Recommended corrective action number 5 is to identify the effects caused by groundwater conditions occurring that would produce undesirable results based on significant unreasonable impacts to applicable sustainability indicators. Additionally, the authority should provide relevant updates in annual reports and 5-year updates to sustainable management criteria based on results from addressing data gaps and any observed impacts due to the implementation of proposed projects. That's a very long sentence. We're not entirely clear on all the aspects of the plan that they're asking us to address, but certainly we recognize in the plan we didn't have enough data to address the management criteria for groundwater-dependent ecosystems and interconnected surface waters, and that we need to look at that and improve that. Over the next 5 years, we'll be doing that. There's already work that's been done on gathering data on groundwater-dependent ecosystems, a plan's in place for that. And we'll be, were some set groundwater sustainability criteria for some wells, specifically on water quality, that we didn't have enough data to set the criteria. We believe that's one of the things they're addressing, and our plan is going forward to take more water quality data out of that so we get a little more history and be able to set those management criteria. Recommended corrective action number 6 is that during the GSP implementation and before the January 31, 2025 update due date, that we establish a management criteria at all the wells the authority intends to designate as representative monitoring wells. I was really just speaking to that. We're gathering more data to allow us to do that. And then the final recommended corrective action is that we update the GSP data management system to reflect complete and correct information to comply with GSP regulations, and that if management areas are going to be considered by the authority, that we include a rationale for those management areas if we do choose to have them. We want to get a little bit more clarification on their comment on the data management system. We do recognize, as I mentioned, we didn't have criteria for all of the wells that we indicated we wanted to monitor. So there's, and we've looked at some additional wells that we think we might put into our key well program. So the DMS, I think, reflects some of those wells we want to add, whereas the GSP doesn't have them. And I think their comment is we just need to make all of those consistent. So we'll be looking at that, getting clarification, and the need for management areas will be discussed, with the TAC and probably as part of the configuration management plan process also. So that's the last of the recommended corrective actions, and I think the end of our presentation on the approval, unless Carol has anything to add.
No, Jeff, thank you so much. This was just for information. There's no board action required, but we're happy to answer any questions.
Very good.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, I'd just to reiterate what Carol said about this community and the public involvement that we've had. I think when I first came up here, I mentioned multiple times how amazed I was to how involved this public was and how informed they were about what was going on. And there was a lot of work to go into this GSP, but we have to recognize the input of the public, the stakeholders, a lot of very, very smart people helping us put it together for the approval. So staff did a lot of work, but you've got great stakeholders in this community. So,
thank you, Steve. I think you're being very humble, but it is very true that there's a lot of work that went out and came from everybody that participated in this, from the public to the PAC and TAC meetings to the board. But I have to say that you and your team have been extremely instrumental in getting us to this point where we are today. There's a lot of bannering in the past about costs and how much everybody's putting into this GSP, but when it comes down to the end result here, when you look at those numbers of how many GSPs were passed, ours was passed, and it's because of the hard work, the costs, and the stress and everything else that's gone into it by everybody that's participated in this. But you have been a foundational block in getting this GSP to where it is today.
Great, great, thank you. And a positive note, we did budget this year $40,000 to address DWR comments on the GSP, so we're certainly not going to spend that. So.
Very good. So let's bring it back to the floor for public comment. Any public comment? Go ahead.
I have a question as PAC chairman. You heard from the discussion, we're involved in at least recommended corrective action item number 1. And when I give my PAC report, we tabled a teaser in advance. We tabled the further communication and engagement plan discussion pending full understanding of what DWR's comments with regards to that mean. That clarifying item number 1, and I think there was one of the other ones that the PAC's involved in too. Do we have a timeline for when we're going to sit down with and get full clarification from DWR so that we can take that on board with tasking? We don't want to start on it without knowing, what their real concerns and recommendations were and understanding them. And so I would like to know when we might get that teed up for a PAC meeting. Steve and I discussed this earlier, and not having DWR here to clarify today or yet at this point, that puts in jeopardy our ability to do that at the next PAC meeting 2 weeks from now. But when do we expect to have full clarification? Yeah. And is there a way I can participate in that as the PAC chair to fully understand what DWR is telling us?
We'll do the last one for sure. There are several questions that we have of DWR. They're not major, but more clarification questions about their recommended corrective actions. So we will be reaching out to DWR probably this next week, and Dave would be happy to have you on board to get clarification on those items so we know exactly what they're looking for as we go forward. So, for sure.
Very good. Any public comment? Seeing none, any public comment on the phones? None there. Bring it back to the board for any comments or discussion from the board?
Yeah, I'd like to make a couple comments. GSP was approved. Good news. That's actually great news. I'd like to congratulate the staff, which I don't do often, and as well as the TAC and the PAC on a job well done. And especially I'd like to congratulate Stetson, who is obviously the key to this whole thing, getting it done in the time frame we had. But it turns out that approval comes with a DWR caveat, and that is the approval or continued approval is dependent upon timely corrective actions being done. My reading of the review would indicate that there's a lot of stuff in that in the DWR review, but the two major deficiencies are the imported water project executability And the second one is solving the chronic overdraft problem. And I'll be watching those two items very closely in months to come. There were 7 major categories of corrective actions, which we just went over. But there turns out there were 19 occurrences of specific deficiencies outlined within the body of the text. And each one of those 19 specific corrective actions need to be addressed. My opinion that we need to have both a schedule and a budget for getting that work done. It's not an insurmountable amount of work, but it quite frankly is more than I think we've got currently in our budget, and we need to have a schedule and have a look at the current budget that's proposed for this year as well as next year to see if we need to make any changes. I guess that's it. But I want to congratulate everybody again. Great job. I'm sure it was a surprise to some people, but it was a very pleasant surprise. So let's take the win and go forward.
Thank you, Director Rotorua. Any other board comments?
Director Heyman, could I jump in there real quick?
Yes, Chairman Peters, go right ahead.
I just wanted to say thanks again to staff and to the public, to the PAC and TAC, for everybody for all their many years of hard work and making this all come to fruition. And I think just to reiterate the point that our GSP was approved when so many others out there weren't is really a testament to how thorough and complete this was and all the hard work that went into it. So congratulations, and we appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you, sir. Any other board comments?
John Boheo, just echoing those comments there. Congratulations to all.
Thank you, Director Vallejo. And Director Ittner, did you have any comments?
No comments.
Thank you. Okay, moving on to item number 13, Water Resources Manager's Report. And this will be with Steve Johnson, staff.
Yes, our staff. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And as we've done before, we'll walk through all of the items carefully and then take comments and questions at the end. And the first, you've seen this before, updates on Prop 1, Prop 68 grant funding, and then the recycled water. Joseph will do that. And then between Joseph and G. Moran has some updates that were added late to the agenda on some actual real field work that's going on right now. She's been up here up in the Wells Valley Basin working on some things this last week. So Jean will be on the line to update on those items, including where we're at with the annual report and some of the some of the work that's been done just recently to get the annual report out for review, but also to address comments and provide responses to comments from last year's annual report. So, Joseph, I think good to go.
Thanks, Steve. Good afternoon again, everyone. Excuse me. Starting with item 13A1, the Prop 1 status update, I'll just preface this by saying that we've had some of these invoices be considered outstanding or not having any updates for several months now. So I actually emailed our DWR grant manager last week for a status update on some of these invoices. And so what you see on at least this slide reflects the update I received from her, I believe it was last Thursday. So starting with invoice 10A in the amount of about $77,000, April confirmed we actually received payment for that invoice on February 2nd. So that invoice is fortunately taken care of. Invoice 11A in the amount of about $70,000. The payment was processed by DWR in early January, and I believe at this time we're just waiting for the payment to be delivered to the authority. So it's good that we don't have any more work to do to address any DWR comments on those two invoices. Invoice 12A is still being reviewed by DWR, and if you'll recall, this invoice includes some costs that were removed from prior invoices, 8A and 9A, and those costs were removed because they were subject to CEQA concurrence review by DWR. I actually got word from our grant manager a few days ago that we do need to make a few changes to how we present those removed costs in invoice 12A to present them in a way that DWR is okay with. So we'll be doing that in the next few weeks and hopefully get that submitted before the next board meeting, because that invoice is for a good amount of money, about $130,000. So we'll be working on that in the coming weeks. Now, moving on to item 13A2, the Prop 68 status update. The slide says that we have no updates from last month. I actually do have a few that I received a few days ago. Invoice 10B, according to our grant manager, the payment for that invoice in the amount of $28.65 was processed in November, and we are awaiting delivery of the funds. I'll probably be reaching out to our grant manager again to let her know that we haven't received the funds for that invoice yet, just to check on where we're at with that. And the same situation for invoice 11B, except the payment was processed in January, so just a few weeks ago. And again, we're waiting delivery of those funds as well. And then for invoice 12B in the amount of $31.58, that invoice is still being reviewed by DWR. I believe Carol signed off on that invoice either yesterday or this morning, so hopefully we'll be receiving payment for that invoice sometime soon as well. And lastly, on the grant agreement side, the status of our amendment that we're working on with DWR, and just for your information, we're requesting this amendment to extend the schedule on the SDAC, water audit leak detection and conservation programs until the end of the year. And we've also included this amendment to expand on that scope of work that our consultant is working on. According to our grant manager, the amendment documents that we submitted several months ago at the end of November are still being reviewed, but they are considered a high priority for DWR to get out to us soon. Part of the reason that the review is taking so long is they've had, I believe, staffing issues as far as certain project managers were out of the office over the last few months. But our grant manager has told me that they're still working on that review, and we hope to have that amendment executed within the next few weeks or so. So that'll wrap up 13A2. And now moving on to 13B1, the Recycled Water Program update. We had a meeting with our technical team, which again includes Jeff Helsley and myself from Stetson on behalf of the authority, Chuck Krieger and Dave Scriven from Krieger and Stewart on behalf of the Water District, and then Mike Nunley and Ron Strand from the city. So we met on January 13th, which I believe was actually the day after the last board meeting. We had a very productive discussion about any updates from our last meeting several months ago on the city's project to expand and upgrade its wastewater treatment facility. We got some more information from Mike and Ron as far as the project plans and the schedule for design and permitting. And we also discussed the topic of Section 3, the preliminary ranking of all of the recycled water alternatives that we're considering. And speaking of that, we wrapped that section up, and I think Steve reported last month that that section was a subject of the TAC meeting from early January, where we presented our preliminary rankings of the alternatives to the TAC. We made a few internal revisions and discussions to that section.
going to be taking place later this month, the start of it. So going to the next slide, 13C2, for groundwater-dependent ecosystems, the board saw this slide earlier last year, and this was prior to the work that we did. We did some field work since this time. The figure to the right is from the GSP, and it shows where vegetation was mapped, and this vegetation coverage is what DWR provides from their website. It also is very coincident with what the Navy has for their groundwater-dependent ecosystem coverage. So this vegetation is vegetation that requires subsurface water, groundwater, to survive. The next slide shows the work that we did in August, last August 11th. We looked at 5 potential GDE sites. Those are the red boxes. And with each site, we went out with Joseph Chirac from the Navy, who's one of the Navy's biologists. We went out with a geologist and then someone else who knew the well coverage at the Navy base. Each of the 5 different areas that we went to, we found the vegetation. We also found the wells. We took groundwater level measurements, but determined that none of them were really great GDE monitoring candidates. Sometimes, as in Area 1, which is the northwest box, we saw tamarisk, but that is not that's considered an invasive species, and it's still debatable whether it is a true GDE. And then Area 5, which is the southeast corner, that vegetation was more related to surface water, and it was cattails and wastewater effluent. The other 3 areas, there was not any healthy vegetation that clearly showed itself as groundwater dependent. We did identify 4 additional sites. They're the purple circles or ellipses on the map. And we are planning to go out to those 3 areas to see if we can get a good monitoring site for GDE monitoring. Mostly what we evaluate are, with the Navy biologists, we determine if it is an actual community of vegetation. And then we look to see where we have nearby monitoring wells so that we can collect groundwater data. And mostly we use aerial mapping and field observations to determine we're looking at determining a reporting scheme for annually assessing if these groundwater-dependent ecosystems have any impact from pumping. We intend to recommend GDE monitoring sites to address this data gap after we do the next field reconnaissance. The next slide is agenda item 13C3. This is also, you've seen some of this information through the last GA board meetings when Steve Reich was giving updates on the COSO funding, royalty funding through the Navy for projects within the basin related to groundwater. So we were awarded the funding to do 2 monitoring wells and also rehabilitate another well that's not on this slide, but 2 monitoring wells to look at subflow from Rose Valley. in the GSP, we estimated that the subflow was about 30% of natural recharge. And this was based on groundwater modeling and other data from Rose Valley that DRI had to develop the estimate. And this data that we would get from these two wells would be able to provide a groundwater level gradient. If we have these two depths to waters plus a cross-sectional area and an estimate of the hydraulic conductivity, the properties of the subsurface, we'll be able to calculate subflow from Rose Valley, or at least get an estimated flow from that area. This project was, as I said, funded by the Navy. We are still working with the Navy in terms of how that funding gets turned over to the GA board, and April's been working on that with the Navy. And the other major contributor to this is BLM. They worked through the permitting of a right-of-way grant for access to both drilling the wells, the construction sites, and to have access to the wells for the next 30 years. That was done last summer. The next slide. So in last January, just a couple weeks ago, we did a site visit with the driller's crew and BLM to look over the permit and make sure that we were able to, that we understood all the different elements of the permit. On February 21st, which is just 12 days away, we're looking at starting to prepare the site and starting the drilling. It will be from 1 week to a little more than a week for each well to be drilled. We're looking at drilling to about 600 feet. That's an estimate based on other wells in the area, including the Fossil Falls campground well, and then a well just south of where these two wells are being drilled. We will continue to coordinate with BLM. There will be a biological monitoring on this site. They will clear the construction area for any kind of nesting of either rodents or birds, and also check for endangered species, which is especially the tortoise in this area. We will do downhole geophysics and water quality sampling, and we will coordinate and report to the TAC. Just yesterday, I'm sure most people have, most members of the TAC have not been able to review it yet, but just yesterday I sent them out a notice of that included the permit, the biological review, and also a cultural review for their records, and then they will get periodic updates as the drilling is commenced and completed, so that they can review all the technical data. And that's what I have to report on these two things. There's one additional data item, and that is the El Paso well that was put in about a year ago. DWR contacted us late last week to say that they had a telemetry program where they wanted to give us telemetry equipment for that well. We are working with them right now so that that telemetry equipment would also match in with the other 8 wells that we have telemetry equipment in. That data is all posted on the data management system website that is managed for the Groundwater Authority. And that, if anyone has any questions on those 2 items, I can take any questions.
Gene, this is Steve. I think you pointed out that the DWR offer to do that was kind of a good thing that they're working with us on this.
Yes, they just contacted us
Yep.
for this.
Yep, all good. Mr. Chairman, I think that's all we have under Water Resource Manager.
Thank you very much. So at this point, we will bring it to the floor for public comment. Any public comment?
We're not on. Yes, you are. Don Decker again. Too loud now. Gene, we haven't met face-to-face in quite a long time now, nor has the TAC really gotten together. I realize that the TAC is in a very ragged condition, but it would have been really useful, I think, if more of the TAC had been involved, for example, in EP1. As far as I can tell, I'm the only one that attempted an overall analysis of EP1 and the general vicinity in Rose Valley, for example. I think the others, had they been invited or encouraged, would have followed a similar path that I took. As far as Rose Valley is concerned, one thing that I have recommended over and over again is that there be some geophysics accompanying that in the form of shallow seismic, because the Rose Valley, what we usually call the notch, has a very complex geology with the splay faults that leave out of that area that pass on down into the main basin here. And there is also a rather spectacularly huge rockfall landslide that is part of the reason why that notch is there in the first place. So without additional geology, it's impossible really to fully interpret the piezometric groundwater levels that the new wells will disclose. I'm not downplaying those wells at all, but it's incomplete. And I think if the TAC had been more engaged, there might have been more encouragement, or maybe even some further understanding, not so much technical, but of ways of exploring that area. There's a lot of geothermal interest in the area, and we might have been able to even partner with some of the folks that have been interested in further geo-exploration of Rose Valley, for example. Anyway, thank you, Gene, for your efforts, and perhaps one of these days the TAC really can get together again and can fully support, which I think we would like to do, fully support these efforts like the Rose Valley underflow. And that's my little encouragement and a set of suggestions, and the red light's telling me it's time to go.
Thank you, Don. Any other public comment from the floor?
Yeah, Wes Katzenstein, PAC member. At a higher level or more policy type level, I continue to believe that the Rose Valley area is a critical part of our basin. If it is indeed 30% of the water, which I can easily believe when you drive north and see how much bigger the mountains are and how much snow is on those mountains. And I think that perhaps something to keep in the back of our minds as this technical work is done is I think it would make sense for our groundwater authority to annex Rose Valley as part of our basin, because I understand it truly is. I understand technically our basin extends up to like the dam to Haywee Reservoir. Or when you're driving north past Coastal Junction, you kind of climb up that area where the trucks slow down a little bit as you're approaching Olancha. The top of that grade is, I believe, kind of where our actual physical basin ends. And it occurs to me there might be a choice could be made someday whether water in that area is used for geothermal or perhaps to flow into this basin. That water may not be of sufficient quality, I don't know, but that's a potential trade-off that the Navy might be able to make someday, is to forego some geothermal generation in favor of allowing more water to flow in the basin. This may all not make technical sense. It may be technical folly, but I think these are things we should keep in our mind as we progress with that work. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Any other public comment from the floor? Okay, seeing none, we'll move to the phone lines. Caller, go ahead. Okay, no further comments. We'll bring back to the board for discussion. Go ahead.
I would like to make a couple comments on item 13CI, the 2021 annual report. But first, I'd like to thank Gene Moran for the excellent feedback that we got from the comments to the 2020 report. They were very informative and greatly appreciated, and appreciate the time that she obviously spent a good deal of time addressing all those comments. I've had just a few minutes to look at the 2020 draft annual report, and no specific comments yet, but two things did jump out at me. One was that there was no overdraft update, and it seems to me that's not going to fly real well with the Department of Water Resources. My feeling is we ought to maybe look at a workaround, because obviously the overdraft is something that's critical, and if there's a way of doing something to address it, we should. Second thing that jumped out was there was no mention of any corrective action in place to avoid the data collection failures that we've had the last 2 years. I don't know whose job it is, whether it's Carol's or Steve's, but we got to make sure that we read those wells this year. We cannot have another year where we say we can't do this and we can't do that because we didn't get the readings that we should have gotten. It's only a month away. I mean, I believe the readings start in late March, something like that. So there's not much time to figure out how we're going to get that done, and we just cannot have a repeat of the last 2 years. So whatever needs to be done, I'm looking at both of you, so whoever wants to take on that job, it's the first thing that needs to be done to ensure that the next report that comes out is going to have the information that we need. So that is it. Thank you.
Jean is addressing that. She's working on that right now, those wells. She might be talking right now.
Is it okay to address?
Yes, go ahead.
The concern? Okay. So I don't want to keep blaming COVID, but there were actually a couple issues. One is the Navy staff, who usually does about half of those groundwater levels, has changed. And we are in the process of training new staff for the Navy to do those water levels. And meanwhile, it takes effort for our staff to go up there and collect Navy groundwater levels. And then in addition, KCWA, who has been collecting groundwater levels since 1995, in 2020 did not come out at all. And that is why water year 2020 was such a problem with how we translated the data. They are still, I'm waiting to hear back from Michelle regarding how March will work. But I did send an email to both Charlotte of the Navy, who is responsible for the Navy groundwater level measurements, and Michelle Anderson with Kern County Water Authority Agency, who is responsible for everything outside the gate. that if there is any restrictions, that we will send out our staff to make sure we get all of those groundwater levels in March, and that it all occurs within 1 week. In water year 2020, our issue was COVID happened in March. Searles Valley Minerals gave us someone to monitor about 20 wells. The Navy was late also. We sent somebody up to do some water levels, but the water levels already were taken after agricultural pumping started, and that affected the analysis. The reason that in 2021, I will look at a way to word how the overdraft is occurring, is that we really should revisit how the methods that we're going to calculate this storage change is looked at. But I do hear both of your comments, and the addressing the groundwater levels being measured this March is underway to make sure that that happens, that we put as many people as we need to in the field to support both KCWA and the Navy to collect those groundwater levels. They've been doing it as in-kind service since the 1990s. And somehow with the restrictions on COVID these last couple of years and new staff, it got all jumbled up. So that it has been the reason the data was not available for these reports.
I greatly appreciate that.
I do get your concern.
I just wanted to make sure that we have a plan B in place so that we don't find out in late April or May that we had a problem. If we have to do something to replace Kern County Water Agency on a permanent basis or whatever has to be done, it's, shouldn't be the board's decision. It ought to be the staff to figure it out. Just, how we get it done. It sounds like we've got it under control this year, but we may want to look at, long term, how are we going to do this so that we ensure that what happened the last 2 years never happens again. Thank you.
Any other board comments?
I've been involved, this is Judy Decker, I've been involved in the water situation in this valley for almost 50 years. And y'all need to know a little history. We pay tax money to the Kern County Water Agency. It was something that was decided in a vote of the people back in the early 60s, I think. Why they chose to join the Kern County Water Agency, excuse me, as opposed to AVEC is an unknown to us. We were not here then. But we pay taxes to them. After the Bureau Reclamation study was done, which was the first time a joint study was done between the Navy, the Water District, then Kerr-McGee, it was decided that is when, Steve, that is when the cooperative groundwater group started. That was an offshoot of the results of the Bureau of Reclamation study. Kern County Water Agency was involved in that somewhat. Our representative at the time for that agency was Terry Rogers, who lived here, still does. He got the Kern Water Agency as part of the use of our tax dollars to come over here and start measuring wells. That's how that all started. And I felt that you people should know a little history of the whole situation. And since I'm standing up here, I'll give you a little more. We've talked a lot about the decline in water levels and wells, but there's an equal, if not more important issue, and that is the decline in water quality. When we moved here in 1969, the people that lived as far up the hill in College Heights as Kendall Street had their own wells. In the early 70s, a development was created in San Bernardino County, just over the county line, whereby the property was divided into, 2.5 or 5 acre parcels and a water system put in. By the early 80s, those people were at the water district asking to become part of the water district because their water quality had declined so much. The same is true for the people who, turn it off, not done, the people who lived in Lower College Heights. The water quality in this basin, along with the water declining, the water quality is declining. You, Scott, and you, Stan, and Tom, you know that the cemetery is in dire straits for water. We used to have a grass cemetery with lots of beautiful trees. They've died because of the water quality. So you need to keep that information available in your minds when you decide things. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy. Okay, back to the board. Any further comments? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to item number 14, General Manager's Report with Carol.
Thank you. First item is our monthly financial report. So what we have in the packet today is our report through end of the year. It is pretty much our year-end report. I think we have maybe a few adjustments to make before it's final for 2021. But in terms of cash basis accounting, I think it's complete. Also, just want to call to your attention that you'll see on the last page the outstanding obligations. Yeah, outstanding obligations. You'll see a note that we are set to begin our repayment on our advance agreement with Kern County. So we'll be making 4 quarterly payments this year to complete that obligation, starting with a payment in March. So you'll see that for approval next month. And then we'll be working to develop a different payment schedule for our obligation to the City of Ridgecrest. Let's see. Okay, next item, I am going to ask for our Capital Core Group report. I'm going to ask Jeff Simonetti to give us that report. I think he's on the line now. Jeff?
Yes, I'm here. Just making sure everyone can hear me okay?
Yes, very good.
Perfect. All right. Technology is working. That's a good thing. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Jeff Simonetti with the Capital Core Group. So just wanted to go through and give you a brief update on a few other items that we were working on this month regarding both agency briefings at both the state and federal level. We talked a lot about the Sigma implementation grant that took up a significant portion of our time last month, so I won't go into any further details on that, but I'll give you a few quick brief other updates. We are in the process of continuing agency briefings with both the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency as well as the Bureau of Reclamation, particularly focusing on potential funding sources through the Investment in Infrastructure and Jobs Act. That was the infrastructure bill that was passed at the federal level late last year. And there are a few programs that we identify there, particularly through the Environmental Protection Agency, that have potential to provide funding sources for both the wastewater treatment plant as well as the wastewater recycling plant. So we are having a briefing later this week with the U.S. EPA Region 9 as well as the State Water Resources Control Board, and we'll have more information once that briefing's finalized. In addition, we are working on the Defense Community Infrastructure Program. There are some proposals there that are working through the National Defense Authorization Act right now pertaining to potential eligibility, and also making sure that that continues to remain funded. And then one final state item that we wanted to bring to your attention. We are bringing a budget proposal and request through both Senator Grove and Assemblymember Fong's office related to the wastewater treatment plant. And on the last page of your package there that we put together in terms of the monthly update, we put together a summary of the recently proposed budget. And there are a couple of important items there that we wanted to highlight. I know there had been discussion in one of the last items there pertaining to shallow well impact mitigation policies. And I just want to let both the board and the general public know that there are a couple of items in the proposed budget, particularly pertaining to multi-benefit water projects that have infrastructure dollars in there specifically designed for helping small communities as well as communities that are in critically overdrafted groundwater basins such as ourselves for addressing shallow well impact mitigations. So there's approximately $200 million through the multi-benefit project there, as well as through the small community water program that has an additional $200 million that we'll be keeping an eye out on. And if there are projects in the future that might need that, that is something to definitely keep in mind that might be something worthwhile taking a look at. In addition, two more highlights on the proposed budget that we want to provide to you. There's going to be $180 million as programmed in the initial budget for further Sigma implementation. They're still making a determination of if further monies will be going towards critically overdrafted groundwater basins or if those will go to medium and high priority basins. As you know, it was, I believe, January 31st that was the deadline for the remainder of the groundwater basins that are medium and high priority that required a groundwater sustainability plan to be completed. So some of that funding likely will go towards those, but we'll be monitoring whether there'll be further funding sources for Sigma implementation for critically overdrafted groundwater basins. Finally, there was, as you will recall last year, there was $50 million given to the multi-benefit land repurposing program, and that was specifically geared towards agriculture and assisting in making the transition there. There's another $50 million that is proposed this year, and we'll also be monitoring that for whether that continues to go through and if that gets increased in the budget. This, again, is just the preliminary budget. Those numbers can move around substantially in between the initial draft and when it gets finalized, but we'll be continuing to monitor that. And that concludes my report, and would be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great. Thank you, Jeff. Shall I move on, or would you like to ask questions of Jeff?
Does anyone have any questions for Jeff at this time? We'll move along.
Very good. Thank you, Jeff. Update on Wolf Hansen is the next item. We are continuing to work with our bond consultant to compile the information that they need for us to be able to move forward. So not a great deal of progress has been made, but we're continuing to work on several things. One of the things that they're going to need rolls into the next item here, which is the update on our 2020 audit. And we were hoping, staff was hoping that we would have the audit ready for review this month. And unfortunately, the schedule has slipped based on reports that we've received from our auditor, Brown Armstrong. Unfortunately, due to their staffing issues, either people who've been sick out of work, off of work from COVID, or basically just people who have left the organization, they've got a staffing shortfall, and they're just delayed on completing our audit. They're hoping to have it ready for us by March or no later than April. So I believe that's the schedule that we're looking for at this point. I guess the upside to that is that we're also thinking that with all the work that's been done to collect information and organize it, we think we can accomplish the 2021 audit in a very timely fashion. So we may be looking to bring the proposal to you as early as March for the consultant to begin, the auditor to begin work on the 2021 audit. Let's see. Finally, April has been compiling a report on delinquent pumpers. What we're really seeing here, though, is that a lot of these pumpers are very small in nature. The amount of the fees does not amount to a great deal of money, especially when compared to the amount of effort that they have to put into their regular reporting. What we would like to do, if the board agrees, is return, hopefully in March, with a recommended change in the reporting requirements for the smaller pumpers so that they could report on an annual basis as opposed to more frequently. We realize that this is a lot of work for them, and I think it would make everybody's life a lot easier for them to comply and easier for us to follow up if we could do it annually. So if you are okay with that, we will bring a recommended change in the policy to you as early as next month.
So I'll bring it back to the board for any comments or those that are in favor of it.
I'll make a motion to support staff's recommendation.
We actually we don't really need a motion. We're just looking for a consensus direction, and we'll bring it back as an item.
Okay.
Then I support that then.
Very good, thank you. And then one final report that I have. Apparently, when we first started the meeting, there was a public comment question from a caller who ended up not being able to get his call through. And his question for us was, how many wells do we have registered in the basin? The caller was Derek Hoffman. And so we just want to let Mr. Hoffman know that there are 252 wells registered in our basin. And that completes.
Mr. Chair, it's John Vallejo.
Go ahead.
I support the recommendation as well to bring that item back. I just want to let the board know, unfortunately, I've got some time-sensitive items that I have to attend to right now, so I'm going to be leaving this meeting early. My apologies. I will check in for the recording to update myself with the PAC and the TAC report and any closing comments that anybody wants to make. So my apologies for leaving early, and I will see you at the next meeting.
Very good. Thank you, Director Vallejo.
And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Carol. Any public comment on General Manager's report from the floor? Seeing none, any public comment on the phones? There are none, so we'll bring it back to the board. Any board comments or questions pertaining to the General Manager's report? Okay, hearing none, we will move on to item number 15, PAC report. Dave Janis.
In front of you should have a copy of the committee report. We had two main topics at our meeting this week. One was the temporary use, which we have already exhaustively discussed, so I'll limit my comments to the second main item, which was a continuing review of the communication and engagement plan. And it's item number 5, and I'll summarize the 4 conclusions that we had out of that discussion and vote. That we passed a motion 6 for, 1 opposed, and 1 abstaining to approve this statement to this effect, and to approve the final report as amended. And the final report, the committee report, is now the PAC, the full PAC report on the Communication and Engagement Plan review and recommendations. I'll summarize it as saying, number one was the GA should provide clear, succinct fact sheets in layman's terms regarding the key essential topics which should be focused on the status of our groundwater basin, the mandates of SGMA, the GSP itself, and the IWVGA actions, and a list of high priority fact sheets following that, of which those should be included, and additional candidate fact sheets were included in the committee report as a whole, as well as a conceptual example fact sheet. And I say conceptual because it's not agreed to necessarily. It was just an example of something in clear layman's language that simplifies the issues, the key issues, that one key issue, for example. So it gives you something to go on what we meant when we said succinct fact sheet in layman's terms. Second item, the GA publish, update, and maintain a monthly schedule to manage tasks and finances. You've heard that from us before. To increase public trust in the GA and its financial responsibility and execution of its mission. The third item was the GA upgrade the website to provide accurate introductory level material for interested stakeholders and readily appear in online searches related to the groundwater in the IWV basin. There was also a discussion part about was not only should have that introductory information, but it can then point into the relevant parts of the GSP itself or the GSP response to DWR, the corrective actions. In each case, start with something that is at the top level, simplified fact sheet that could then point to links in the website to the specific complete documents. And the final thing was we agreed to table any recommendation on a actual physical change to the actual communication and engagement plan until we get clarification of that DWP language, which applies to the communications and engagement plan. So that would be pending for the next potential PAC meeting, where we might take that up. And that completes my report. You have in front of you that enclosed document, the subcommittee report out, which was validated by the entire committee, 6-1 vote. Any questions?
Thank you, Dave. Any public comment on this item? Seeing none from the floor. Any public comment on the phones? None. We'll bring back to the board for any discussion from public comments. So at this stage, we're not looking for anything from the board as far as an approval, and so I just want to commend you on everyone involved with this on their hard work. This is the closest thing I've seen this come to is in regards to public relations addressment, and so I'd like to see us move forward on this in the near future. So I'm not sure what the rest of the board's feelings are on it, but open here, or looking to hear from anybody else's comments. So.
Yeah, Director Heyman, if I could jump in, I agree. Thank you, Dave, and all the PAC for your work on that. And I think these are some really solid suggestions about getting people more informed and getting that information out there to them in a way that they can find it and a little easier, and it's a little bit more easy to digest. So thank you guys for your work on that, and I'm looking forward to implementing some of these ideas.
And so at this point, is it in the GA board's hands as far as following through with this this task?
Yes. Our supposition was, having asked us to do this review, and you take our recommendations and have staff figure out how to implement them. and perhaps come back to us if you need or request help or clarification in that. But it's key things that we think, as representatives of all the stakeholders in the valley, that we think you need to communicate, having completed the GSP, and now we're in the implementation process. And as suspected, DWR, came out and said the continuing communication process with key essential elements, I think that was roughly the language they used, was something they're going to continue to look at. So it's in their mind very important, and I think this gives you some key areas to focus on where our background and experience in this is in our interface with the public. This is areas where we, the GA overall, have been maybe ineffective in communicating key issues across the entire valley.
Very good. And so is this something that we could have on the future agenda item is even as an update on where we're at with it and progress on it, so we could keep it in the forefront to... Perfect. I mean, that's my statement. I'm assuming the board, the rest of the board, if they have any comments and agree, with that, please speak. Go ahead and speak.
Yeah, I definitely agree, Director Heyman. We need to start implementing this, and I'm willing to provide staff whatever direction they need to start moving forward with some of these suggestions and getting that information out there.
Very good. Any other comments from the board? Okay, seeing none. Thank you, Dave, for all your hard work and your team, and everyone our thanks to the entire PAC committee and for all their hard work on this, and look forward to seeing where we go with it in the future, in the long run. I think it's a very, very good thing to be working on for the GA as a whole and for the public to be able to get good solid information on what's been done, where we're going, and what the goals are. So, all right, and with that, we will move on to item number 16, which is day of the next meeting. Our next meeting will be March 9th, and with that, this meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everyone.